The morning mist clung to the water like a memory that refused to fade. I stood on the dock my grandfather built in 1947, coffee growing cold in my hand, watching dawn paint the lake in shades of copper and gold. Wesley Brandt, 66 years old, retired preservation architect. For 4 decades, I'd protected historic buildings from developers who saw only dollar signs where history stood. Now the fight had come home. The paper fluttered against the piling, white and crisp against weathered wood. I pulled it down slowly, feeling the tape resist before giving way. Notice of violation. The letters were bold, bureaucratic, designed to make you feel small. Property in noncompliance with community standards. Immediate remediation required. Contact Lakeshore Estates HOA for details. I walked back toward the cabin, boots crunching on gravel my grandfather laid in 1963. The structure rose ahead, weathered cedar that had darkened with age but never rotted. Above the door, carved into a plank, read the words that mattered most. Brandt, 1947. This wasn't just property. This was legacy. Inside, the smell of old pine and my grandfather's tobacco still lived in the beams. I opened the safe he'd installed himself. 3 turns right, 2 left, 1 right. The door swung open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, sat the original deed from 1947. Clean property lines, consecutive tax records, and a letter he'd written in 1985, his handwriting still sharp despite arthritis. If someone tries to take this land, he'd written, remember that our rights don't come from paperwork. They come from history, from sweat, from being here first. Don't let them rewrite what we built. 30 years ago, he'd foreseen this. The encroachment of development, the quiet erosion of rights beneath layers of regulations and bylaws. He'd left me instructions, not just legal ones but moral ones. I folded the letter carefully and walked outside. That's when I saw them. Orange survey stakes, bright and invasive, driven into soil that had never been disputed. I counted 6 of them, marching in a line that cut across land my family had owned for 78 years. I knelt and pulled one free. The metal came out easily, earth still soft from rain. No markings, no permit number, just an orange cap and steel planted like a declaration of conquest. The engine sound came before the vehicle appeared. A black SUV, glossy and oversized, rolling up the access road with the confidence of ownership. It stopped just short of my property line. Nobody got out. The windows were tinted dark, but I felt the assessment. Someone was watching, taking notes, building a file. I didn't wave or acknowledge them. I just stood there with the survey stake in my hand, letting them see I'd noticed. The SUV idled for 30 seconds, then reversed smoothly and disappeared. I walked the perimeter after that, checking for more intrusions. That's when I found the camera. Small, weatherproof, mounted 15 feet up on a tree branch, angled directly toward my cabin. I took 3 photos with my phone, date-stamped, geotagged. Old habits from 40 years of documenting historic structures. Details matter. Evidence matters. Memory isn't enough when someone's trying to rewrite history. That evening, I sat on the porch watching sunset turn the water from copper to indigo. My grandfather used to say the lake had moods, but it was always the same water. The moods just revealed it differently. Right now, watching shadows lengthen across my land, I could feel the change coming. The air had that electric stillness before a storm. The stakes, the camera, the SUV. These weren't random acts. They were preparations. Someone was laying groundwork, setting the stage for something bigger, doing it quietly, hoping I wouldn't notice until too late. But I'd noticed, I'd documented, and now I was waiting. The cabin stood solid behind me, every timber exactly where my grandfather placed it. The deed was in the safe. The evidence was on my phone. Let them come with their lawyers and their forged maps and their quiet boundary revisions. The lake holds memories, and so do I. They arrived 3 days later at exactly 10 in the morning. 4 of them. The black SUV rolled up my access road with the confidence of people who believe they already own the place. I was on the porch sanding a section of railing that had started to splinter. 40 years as a preservation architect teaches you that maintenance is prayer. You tend things before they break. I kept sanding as they climbed out, smooth, even strokes. The sound was rhythmic, meditative, a reminder that some work can't be rushed. The woman led the way. White suit, cream heels that had no business on gravel. Her hair was pulled back so tight it looked painful, and her smile was the kind you practice until it stops reaching your eyes. Behind her came two men in dark suits carrying leather portfolios, and a third with a surveyor's vest and clipboard. They arranged themselves at the base of my porch steps like a delegation. Official. Rehearsed. The woman extended her hand. "Mr. Brandt, I'm Corin Ashford, president of the Lakeshore Estates Homeowners Association. I believe you received our notice." Her voice was smooth, pleasant, the kind of tone that makes threats sound like favors. I set down my sandpaper and looked at her hand. Manicured nails, no calluses. Hands that had never built anything. I didn't take it. After a moment, she lowered it. The smile tightened at the edges. "This is private property," I said. "You're on it without permission." She nodded as if I'd said something quaint. "Of course. We apologize for the intrusion, but we felt it was important to discuss this face to face. We're here to make you a very generous offer." One of the lawyers stepped forward, opening his portfolio. Inside was a document, thick and official-looking. He held it out like a gift. $850,000, Mr. Brandt. Cash. We believe that's more than fair given the current market valuation and the condition of the structures. I didn't reach for it, didn't even look at it. I kept my eyes on Corin. She was watching me like a poker player watches an opponent, looking for tells, looking for weakness. "I'm not selling," I said. The words came out flat, simple. Her smile shifted into something that might have been sympathy if it had been real. "I understand this property has sentimental value, Mr. Brandt. Family history. We respect that. But the reality is this area has changed significantly since your grandfather's time. Lakeshore Estates represents a new chapter for this community. Higher standards, better amenities, a cohesive vision." "Cohesive vision," I repeated. "That's an interesting way to say you want everything to look the same." She ignored that. "What I'm saying is your cabin, charming as it is, doesn't align with the community aesthetic we've worked very hard to establish. It's affecting property values, creating tensions with neighbors who have invested significantly in this area. We're trying to find a solution that benefits everyone." I leaned back against the railing, arms crossed. "You're telling me the cabin my grandfather built in 1947 on land he bought and paid for is somehow your problem to solve?" "It's not about blame, Mr. Brandt, it's about progress." Her voice had shifted, still smooth but with an edge now. "The fact is, as of our 2022 boundary revision, this property falls within HOA jurisdiction. That means it's subject to our architectural guidelines, our maintenance standards, and our community regulations. The notice you received lists multiple violations. We're prepared to work with you on remediation, but if you're unwilling to cooperate, we have legal authority to enforce compliance." There it was, the threat wrapped in politeness, the velvet glove with the iron fist inside. I straightened slowly, taking my time. "This cabin has been here for 78 years. Your association has existed for 7. Tell me again who doesn't belong." Her jaw tightened, just for a second, just enough. "Mr. Brandt, I don't think you understand the situation." "I understand perfectly," I said. "You want my land. You've decided it's worth more to you than to me. So you're manufacturing reasons why I should give it up. Violations, standards, jurisdiction. You're wrapping theft in bureaucracy and hopping I'm too old or too tired to fight back." The silence after that was different, colder. The lawyers exchanged glances. The surveyor looked down at his clipboard. Corin's smile had disappeared entirely. She reached into her purse and pulled out a cream envelope, thick, expensive paper. She set it on the railing between us. This contains formal documentation of your violations and our requirements for remediation. You have 30 days to respond. I strongly suggest you consult with legal counsel, Mr. Brandt. This doesn't have to become adversarial. She turned and walked back toward the SUV, heels clicking against stone. The others followed. I waited until they were gone before picking up the envelope. 8 pages, single-spaced, a catalog of supposed infractions, every line designed to make me feel like a criminal for living in the house my grandfather built. I read it twice. Then I went inside and made a call to Fletcher Donovan, grandson of a man I'd worked with 30 years ago. Smart kid, good lawyer. He picked up on the second ring. "Fletcher," I said, "I need you to pull every land survey and HOA filing for Lakeshore Estates going back to incorporation, especially anything related to boundary changes in 2022. There was a pause. "Wesley, what's going on?" I looked out at the lake. The surface was glass smooth, perfectly calm. "Someone's trying to take my land," I said, "and they're using paperwork to do it." The certified letter arrived on Tuesday. Heavy, stiff, bearing the HOA logo like a seal of authority. I signed for it, brewed coffee, and opened it carefully. Evidence. Everything had to be preserved. Notice of mandatory compliance hearing. The header was bold, threatening. Below it, 3 paragraphs of legal language that translated to a simple message. Appear before the HOA board in 5 days or face immediate enforcement action. The alleged violations were listed again, this time with estimated remediation costs attached. $45,000 in fines. The number sat on the page like a dare. They weren't trying to fix anything. They were trying to make staying impossible. Financial pressure. Death by 1,000 cuts. It was an old tactic, bleeding someone dry until selling looked like relief. I spread the letter beside the original deed and survey maps. Evidence, context, truth. Then I started working. 40 years of restoration work taught me that every building has a story written in its bones, and every story has documentation to prove it. I pulled property records going back to 1947. Tax assessments showing continuous payment without gap or dispute, historical photographs of the cabin at various stages, my grandfather standing on the porch in 1952, my father replacing shingles in 1978, me and my late wife painting the trim in 2003, each image dated, each one proving occupancy and care. Then I pulled the original county survey from 1947. The property lines were clear, unambiguous. My land ended at the oak tree 60 feet from the water line. The HOA development didn't even exist when those boundaries were set. But something didn't match. I laid the old survey next to a recent aerial photo from the county database. The lines didn't align. Someone had moved them. Not physically, not with stakes and string, but on paper. The digital boundary showed my property smaller, compressed, as if 2 decades of shoreline had simply vanished into administrative revision. I traced the line with my finger, comparing reference points. The oak tree, the granite outcropping, the curve of the inlet. All the permanent markers were still there in reality, but on the official map, they'd been shifted, redrawn, erased and replaced with something that served someone else's purpose. My phone rang. "Fletcher, I pulled everything you asked for," he said. His voice was tight. "Wesley, we need to talk. Can I come out there?" "How fast can you get here?" 20 minutes. He arrived in 18. I met him on the porch and we spread the documents across the table. Fletcher was 32, sharp-eyed, with his grandfather's careful, methodical approach to evidence. He laid out a stack of papers, tapping each one as he spoke. The HOA was incorporated in 2018, 7 years ago. They filed a boundary revision in 2022 that expanded their jurisdiction to include properties that were previously outside it, including yours. "Without notification," I said. "Without proper notification," he corrected. "According to county records, A certified letter was sent to your address regarding the boundary expansion. It shows as delivered and signed for. I never received it. He pulled out another document. I know, because the signature on the delivery receipt isn't yours. It's signed by someone named C. Ashford. The air went still. She'd signed for my mail, intercepted the notification that would have given me the right to challenge the boundary change, then filed it as proof of delivery. It was elegant in its simplicity, illegal but elegant. That's mail fraud, Fletcher said quietly. Federal offense, and if she did it to you, she probably did it to others. I thought about the other survey stakes I'd found, the careful precision of their placement. How many properties were included in that boundary revision? Fletcher flipped through his notes. 8 confirmed, all of them small parcels held by single owners or families, all along the waterfront. 8 families, 8 pieces of land absorbed into someone else's vision of progress. We need to contact them. Already working on it. He paused. But Wesley, you need to prepare yourself. This is about to get worse before it gets better. When people like Corin Ashford realize how exposed they are, they push back hard. He was right. The escalation came that afternoon. Another certified letter. But this time it wasn't a hearing notice. It was an eviction order. 14 days to vacate the premises pending HOA enforcement action. Failure to comply would result in forced removal with assistance from county authorities. I read it 3 times. The language was carefully constructed, threatening but vague, designed to sound official without actually being enforceable. They were betting I wouldn't know the difference between an HOA demand and a court order. I called Fletcher back. They're trying to evict me. They can't. They don't have that authority. That's not a legal eviction notice, Wesley. It's a letter pretending to be one. It references county authorities. Intimidation tactic. Ignore it but document everything. We're building a harassment case now. I did what he said. Photographed the envelope, scanned the contents, added it to my growing file. Then I went down to the basement and opened the old gun cabinet my grandfather had built into the wall. The shotgun sat on its pegs exactly where it had been for 40 years. 12-gauge, double-barrel, walnut stock worn smooth from decades of use. I lifted it down carefully, feeling the weight of it, the balance. My grandfather had taught me to shoot with this gun when I was 12. Taught me to respect it, to understand that a firearm isn't a toy or a threat. It's a tool. And like any tool, its meaning comes from how you use it. I cleaned it that night. Ran an old cloth down the barrels, checked the action, made sure everything moved smoothly. Then I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I loaded it. 2 shells, birdshot, not for shooting, for presence, for the statement it makes when someone sees you're prepared to defend what's yours. I carried it upstairs and set it in the corner of the living room, visible through the front window. A symbol, a line drawn. I wasn't planning to use it, but I wanted anyone watching to know I wasn't defenseless. That there was a difference between being peaceful and being harmless. The lake darkened to black outside. The cabin settled into its evening sounds, the creak of old wood, the whisper of wind through eaves. Somewhere in the distance, a loon called out, mournful and clear. I sat in my grandfather's chair and thought about what came next. The hearing was in 3 days. Fletcher was preparing our defense, but Corin Ashford had lawyers and money and the machinery of an organization that had done this successfully before. The only advantage I had was the truth, and sometimes in the right hands truth was enough. The SUVs came at 11 that night, 3 of them black, no headlights. I heard them before I saw them, tires crunching gravel, engines idling low in the darkness. I was already awake, had been for hours waiting. 6 men climbed out. They wore uniforms, not police, not sheriff, private security. HOA patrol printed across their backs in reflective letters. They carried flashlights and clipboards and surveying equipment, moving with purpose, with authorization they didn't actually have. I watched from the window as they spread out across my property, setting up lights, taking measurements, photographing everything as if the land were already theirs, as if I'd already left, as if my 78 years of family ownership had been erased by paperwork and midnight operations. I stepped out onto the porch. The shotgun was in my hands, not pointed, not raised, just held, present, visible in the porch light. "This is private property," I said. My voice was calm, steady, loud enough to carry across the yard. "You're trespassing, leave now." The men froze. Flashlights swung toward me, beams cutting through darkness. I saw the lead man's hand move to his radio, saw the hesitation, the calculation. They'd been told this would be easy, that I was some old man who could be intimidated with official-looking uniforms and aggressive posturing. But they hadn't been told about the gun, about the fact that trespassing on occupied property in the middle of the night is legally ambiguous at best, about the fact that I had every right to stand here and defend my home. "Sir," the lead man said, his voice careful now, "we have authorization from—" "You have nothing," I said. "No warrant, no court order, just a letter from an organization that has no legal authority over this property. You have 30 seconds to get in your vehicles and leave before I call the sheriff's office and report an armed intrusion." I didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there with the gun across my forearm, waiting. The silence stretched tight, electric. One of the men in the back said something I couldn't hear. Then the lead man made his decision. "Move out," he said quietly. They packed up fast, folded the lights, grabbed their equipment, retreated to their vehicles. Within 2 minutes, all 3 SUVs were revering down the access road, red taillights disappearing into darkness. I stayed on the porch for another hour, watching, waiting, making sure they didn't come back. My hands were steady on the gun. My heartbeat was slow and even. 40 years of preservation work had taught me patience. You don't rush when something important is at stake. You wait, you watch, you protect what matters. The deputy arrived 20 minutes after I called. Sandra Martinez, 10-year veteran, sharp eyes that missed nothing. She took my statement, photographed the tire tracks, the equipment marks in the soil, the trampled grass where they'd set up their lights. "You did the right thing," she said, making notes on her tablet. "But they're going to claim you threatened them." I stood on my own property with a visible firearm. I didn't point it, didn't threaten, just existed. She nodded slowly. "That's good, because you're about to need that distinction." She was right. By morning, the video was everywhere. 15 seconds of footage, me on the porch with the shotgun. No audio, no context, just the image. The comments rolled in within hours. Dangerous, unstable, threatening community safety. Someone had edited it, stripped away everything that came before and after, reduced the entire encounter to a single frame that made me look like the aggressor. Corinne knew exactly what she was doing. She couldn't win on facts, so she was winning on optics, making me look like the villain, turning defense into aggression in the court of public opinion. My phone rang constantly. Fletcher called twice. News stations wanted interviews. Neighbors I'd known for years suddenly had questions. I ignored most of it, but I couldn't ignore the knock at my door that evening. She was maybe 50, gray streaks in her dark hair, eyes that looked like they hadn't slept in days. She wore jeans and a sweater that had seen better years. Her hands were shaking. "Mr. Brandt," she said quietly, "my name is Lillian Porter. I used to work for the HOA. I need to talk to you." I stepped aside and let her in. She sat at the kitchen table while I made coffee, didn't speak until I set a cup in front of her. Then it all came out in a rush. Words that had been building pressure for months, maybe years. "I was their secretary," she said. "Started in 2019. Filing, correspondence, meeting minutes, normal administrative work. It was supposed to be simple, part-time, something to help with bills after my divorce." She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup like she was trying to draw warmth from it. "In 2022, Corin asked me to update some boundary maps. Said it was routine, consolidating paperwork, making sure everything matched county records. I didn't think anything of it. She looked up at me, and I saw the weight she'd been carrying. I should have thought something of it. "What did she have you do?" I asked. She reached into her bag and pulled out a USB drive, set it on the table between us like evidence at a crime scene. She gave me the original survey maps, the ones filed with the county in 2018 when the HOA was incorporated. Then she gave me edited versions, told me to replace the originals in the digital system, to update the filing dates so it looked like the new versions had always been there. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I said no, told her I couldn't do that it was falsifying records. She said if I didn't, she'd make sure I never worked in this county again, that she'd sue me for breach of contract, that she'd ruin me. The room was very quiet, just her breathing and the distant call of a loon on the lake. "I have 3 kids, Mr. Brandt. I'm a single mother. I was afraid, so I did what she asked. I changed the maps. I backdated the files. I made it look like your property had always been inside HOA jurisdiction." She was crying now, silent tears running down her face. And then she had me do it for 7 other properties, 7 other families, all of them small parcels, all of them owned by people who'd been here longer than the HOA, people who'd never agreed to join. I sat down across from her slowly, carefully. "But you kept copies." She nodded. "I kept everything. The original maps, the emails where she gave me instructions, the correspondence with the county office where we filed the fraudulent revisions. I told myself it was insurance, that if she ever tried to blame me, I'd have proof it was her idea." She pushed the USB drive toward me. "It's all on here, 47 emails, original and altered maps, a list of the 8 target properties, dates, instructions, everything." I picked up the drive. It was small, plastic, ordinary, but it held the kind of truth that could dismantle an entire organization. "Why now?" I asked. "Why are you telling me this now?" She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Because I saw what they did to you, the signs in your yard, the video they posted, the way they're making you look dangerous when all you did was stand your ground. And I realized that if I kept quiet, I was just as guilty as she is. More guilty, maybe, because I knew it was wrong and I did it anyway." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I can't fix what I did to those other families. Most of them are gone now, sold their land or lost it to foreclosure, but you're still here, you're still fighting, and maybe if I help you, it counts for something." I called Fletcher immediately. He arrived within the hour. We sat at my kitchen table until dawn, going through every file on that USB drive, building a case, documenting fraud, turning suspicion into proof. By the time the sun came up over the lake, we had something irrefutable, not just a defense for my property, a complete roadmap of criminal conspiracy that reached back years and touched 8 different families. Corin Ashford had built an empire on forged documents and manufactured authority. And now, thanks to a secretary with a conscience, that empire was about to crumble. Fletcher spread the documents across my dining room table like a general planning a campaign. 47 emails, 8 sets of falsified maps, correspondence with county officials that showed a pattern of systematic deception stretching back 3 years. The evidence wasn't just compelling, it was damning. "We're not just defending your property anymore," he said, tapping a particularly incriminating email. "We're taking down an entire criminal operation. Mail fraud, document forgery, conspiracy to defraud multiple property owners. This is federal territory now, Wesley." I poured more coffee, watching dawn light creep across the lake. "How many of the other families can we contact?" "I've tracked down 6 of the 8. 2 moved out of state. 1 refused to talk, probably scared. But 3 have agreed to provide statements, and 2 are willing to testify in person." Over the next 2 days, those testimonies came in. Each one added another layer to the pattern Corin had created, another life disrupted by manufactured violations and forged documents. The first was Marcus Henderson, 73 years old. His family had owned a small cottage on the lake since the 1960s. The HOA had cited him for 17 violations, accumulated fines of $63,000, then filed a lien on his property when he couldn't pay. He'd been forced to sell at 30% below market value. The buyer was a shell company that dissolved 6 months later, the property eventually absorbed into HOA common areas. "They broke me," Marcus said during his video testimony, his voice shaking. "Not with one big hit, but with 1,000 small cuts, letters every week, fines for things that weren't even violations. They wore me down until I had nothing left to fight with." The second was Alina Wright, 84 years old. Her husband had built their retirement home by hand in 1981. After his death, the HOA claimed the house violated setback requirements based on revised boundaries she'd never been notified about. They'd harassed her with daily violation notices, threatened legal action, created such sustained pressure that her children finally convinced her to sell and move into assisted living. "They took my home," she said, crying during her statement. "The home my husband built with his own hands, and they did it with papers and threats and making me feel like I was the one doing something wrong." The third testimony came from Jennifer and Michael Torres, a younger couple who'd inherited lakefront property from Jennifer's grandparents. The HOA had cited them for operating an illegal short-term rental, even though they'd never rented the property. They'd fought back initially, but gave up after the HOA filed a lawsuit demanding $120,000 in penalties. "We couldn't afford to keep fighting," Michael said. "We had 2 kids, jobs we couldn't leave. They knew we'd break eventually, and we did." Fletcher recorded everything, organized it, cross-referenced it with Lillian's documents. The pattern was undeniable. Corin hadn't targeted random properties. She'd systematically identified valuable waterfront parcels held by vulnerable owners, then used forged documents and manufactured violations to force them out. "This is racketeering," Fletcher said. "Organized criminal activity. When the prosecutor sees this, they're going to want everything. Financial records, board meeting minutes, every document the HOA has produced in the last 7 years." But Corin was fighting back. Her lawyers filed 3 motions in 2 days. Motion to dismiss based on HOA authority. Motion to suppress evidence obtained from Lillian, claiming breach of confidentiality. Motion for emergency injunction preventing me from making public statements about the case. "She's trying to bog us down in procedure," Fletcher said. "Make it expensive, make it exhausting, make you want to settle just to end it." "I looked out at the lake, at the cabin my grandfather built with his own hands. I'm not settling." On the 5th day, we got unexpected help. A county investigator named Thomas Brennan showed up at my door with a warrant to examine HOA financial records. Someone downtown had noticed the pattern of property acquisitions and forced sales. They were opening a parallel investigation into possible RICO violations and money laundering. Brennan was professional, thorough. He spent 3 hours going through our evidence, taking copies of everything. When he left, he said something that stayed with me. "Mr. Brandt, you might have thought you were just defending your property, but what you actually did was expose something much bigger. A lot of people are going to be watching what happens here." That night, I sat on the porch and thought about the weight of it. I'd wanted to protect my grandfather's cabin, to preserve what he'd built. I hadn't set out to bring down an entire organization or trigger federal investigations. But sometimes justice doesn't care what you intended. Sometimes it just uses you as the catalyst for something that needed to happen anyway. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 days out. Fletcher worked around the clock, preparing exhibits, organizing testimony, building an airtight case. Lillian was placed in witness protection after receiving threatening messages on her phone. The other property owners were contacted by Brennan's team. Their statements added to the growing criminal investigation. Meanwhile, Corin filed her counter-lawsuit: defamation, harassment, threatening behavior, demanding $500,000 in damages plus immediate forfeiture of my property. It was desperate, transparent, but it was also dangerous, because now we weren't just in an administrative dispute. We were in active litigation, and litigation has momentum. Once it starts, it's hard to stop. The signs appeared again in my yard the next morning. Bright yellow, staked deep into the soil, property in violation, HOA action pending. They'd been planted overnight while I slept. A message. A reminder that Corin still had resources, still had people willing to follow her orders. I photographed them, added them to the evidence file. Then I left them standing. Let everyone who drove past see exactly what kind of organization this was. The kind that responded to legal challenges with vandalism. The kind that mistook intimidation for authority. Fletcher called that afternoon with news that changed everything. The forensic document expert finished her analysis. 87% probability of forgery on the signature they claimed was yours from 1998. The pressure points are wrong. The letter formation is inconsistent. Wesley, this document was created recently and backdated. So they didn't just forge my signature, I said. They created an entire fake historical record. Exactly, and there's more. The notary stamp on that document, the public notary listed, died in 2015. I pulled his records from when he was alive. In 1998, he notarized 12 property transfers in this area, all for a development company called Lakeshore Properties, LLC. Let me guess, I said. That company is connected to the current HOA. It's not just connected, it's the predecessor. Lakeshore Properties went bankrupt in 2020. 3 months later, the HOA was incorporated using the same office address and many of the same board members, including Corin Ashford, who was vice president of the original development company. The pieces fell into place. This wasn't opportunism. It was systematic. A failed real estate scheme reconstituted as a homeowners association, using the legal framework of community governance to accomplish what the original company couldn't: forced acquisition of valuable waterfront property. How deep does this go? I asked. Deep enough that the FBI is now involved. Brennan made some calls. They're opening a formal investigation into organized fraud and racketeering. Wesley, this is bigger than any of us realized. I looked out at the lake. The water was calm, mirror-smooth, reflecting clouds and sky. My grandfather used to say the lake could teach you patience if you watched it long enough. That it moved slowly, but it moved everything eventually. Nothing could resist water when water had time. The hearing was in 2 days. We had the evidence. We had witnesses. We had the truth documented in ways that couldn't be denied. But Corin had money and lawyers and the machinery of an organization that had successfully done this 8 times before. 2 days to prepare. 2 days to make sure every argument was airtight. 2 days before we'd find out if the system worked the way it was supposed to, or if it just worked for whoever could afford the better lawyers. I made a promise to myself that night. Whatever happened in that courtroom, I wouldn't compromise, wouldn't settle, wouldn't accept anything less than complete vindication. Not because I was stubborn, but because some things are worth fighting for all the way to the end. And this was one of them. The courthouse smelled like old wood and floor wax and the accumulated weight of 1,000 decisions. I arrived early, wearing my grandfather's navy blue wool suit that still fit after 40 years. Fletcher met me on the steps, briefcase in hand, eyes sharp with the focused intensity of someone who'd barely slept. Behind us, a crowd was forming. News cameras, reporters with notebooks, people from the community who'd heard about the case. The woman from the lake cottage was there, leaning on a cane. The younger couple who'd lost their inheritance. Others I didn't recognize, all of them quiet, waiting to see if justice was real or just another word people used when they wanted something. The courtroom filled quickly. Corin sat at the plaintiff's table with 3 lawyers in expensive suits. She wore gray today, conservative, professional, trying to look like the reasonable party in an unreasonable dispute. She didn't look at me when I sat down. Judge Patrick Morrison entered and we all stood. He was older than I expected, 70 at least, silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of face that had seen enough courtroom theater to be permanently unimpressed. He sat down and reviewed the docket. "This case has attracted considerable attention," he said. "I want to make something clear. This is a court of law, not a stage. I will hear evidence. I will apply relevant statutes. And I will rule based on facts, not feelings. Is that understood?" Both sides nodded. He gestured to Corin's lead attorney, a man named Richard Caldwell with perfectly styled hair and a smile like polished steel. "Plaintiff may present." Caldwell stood smoothly, confidence rehearsed and perfected. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of regulatory noncompliance. Mr. Brandt owns property within HOA jurisdiction and has repeatedly refused to comply with community standards. When the HOA attempted enforcement through proper channels, Mr. Brandt responded with threats and intimidation." He clicked a remote and the video appeared on the courtroom screen. Me on the porch, shotgun visible, 15 seconds of footage with no sound, no context, just the image. "This is what happens when one individual believes rules don't apply to him," Caldwell said, his voice smooth and practiced. "The HOA has acted in good faith at every turn. We've offered generous compensation. We've provided multiple opportunities for dialogue. We've followed every procedural requirement. And we've been met with hostility and the implicit threat of violence." He walked through the HOA's case methodically. The violation notices, the hearing invitations I'd supposedly ignored, the purchase offer I'd rejected. He made it sound reasonable, as if they'd been forced into enforcement by my stubbornness, as if the shotgun was proof of dangerous instability rather than self-defense. When he finished, Judge Morrison turned to our table. "Defense." Fletcher stood. He didn't speak immediately. Just let the silence settle, let the courtroom feel the weight of what was coming. Then he placed a single document on the overhead projector. "Your Honor, this is the deed to Mr. Brandt's property, dated 1947, recorded with this county, never disputed until 2022. He placed another document beside it. "This is the original survey map showing property boundaries established in 1947. Notice the reference markers, the oak tree, the granite outcropping, the curve of the inlet." Another document. "This is the HOA boundary map filed in 2022. Notice how the lines have moved, how Mr. Brandt's property, which was clearly outside HOA jurisdiction for 75 years, suddenly appears inside it." He paused, letting the judge study both maps. "The question isn't whether Mr. Brandt violated HOA rules, Your Honor. The question is whether the HOA had any authority over his property in the first place, and the answer is no." He pulled out the forensic report. "The HOA claims Mr. Brandt agreed to jurisdiction in 1998. This is the signature analysis showing that claim is false. 87% probability of forgery. The notary who supposedly certified it was dead by the time this document surfaced, and the person who signed for Mr. Brandt's boundary notification wasn't Mr. Brandt. It was Corin Ashford herself." The courtroom stirred. Judge Morrison leaned forward. "You're alleging the plaintiff forged documents to manufacture jurisdiction." "I'm not alleging, Your Honor, I'm proving." Fletcher introduced Lillian's testimony next. She walked to the witness stand slowly, hands clasped in front of her. Under oath, she repeated everything. The instructions from Corin to alter boundary maps, the emails directing her to backdate files. The 47 pieces of documentation showing systematic fraud across 8 different properties. Her voice shook but never broke. When Caldwell tried to discredit her during cross-examination, suggesting she was a disgruntled employee seeking revenge, Lillian looked him straight in the eye. "I'm a mother of 3, she said quietly. "I'm here because I helped do something wrong and I'm trying to make it right. You can question my motives, but you can't question the emails. You can't question the maps. You can't question the paper trail that proves every word I've said." Judge Morrison called recess. When we returned an hour later, Fletcher called the other property owners to testify. One by one, they told their stories. Marcus Henderson, who'd lost his cottage to fabricated fines. Elena Wright, who'd been harassed off land her husband built. Jennifer and Michael Torres, forced to settle a lawsuit based on violations that never existed. Each story built on the last. A pattern, a system, an organization that had weaponized bureaucracy to steal property it had no legal claim to. By late afternoon, Judge Morrison sat back in his chair, studying the evidence spread before him. Maps, emails, testimony, expert analysis. The weight of proof was overwhelming, undeniable. Corin sat rigid at the plaintiff's table, her face pale, her lawyers whispering urgently among themselves. Judge Morrison cleaned his glasses slowly, deliberately. Then he looked up. "I've been on this bench for 23 years, he said. "I've seen fraud before. I've seen people bend rules and exploit loopholes and push the boundaries of legal behavior. But I've rarely seen fraud this systematic, this calculated, this cruel." He looked directly at Corin. "Miss Ashford, the evidence presented today shows a pattern of criminal fraud, document forgery, mail fraud, and conspiracy to defraud multiple property owners. This court rules entirely for the defendant. All HOA claims against Mr. Brandt's property are dismissed with prejudice. All violation notices are void. All fines are canceled." He paused. "Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate investigation into every property acquisition made by this HOA since its incorporation. I am referring this matter to the county prosecutor for criminal charges. And I am issuing a preliminary injunction preventing the HOA from taking any enforcement action against any property owner until this matter is fully resolved." The gavel came down, final, absolute. The courtroom exhaled. Relief and vindication settled over the gallery like morning light breaking through clouds. Fletcher squeezed my shoulder. Marcus Henderson wiped his eyes. Elena Wright smiled for the first time in years. Corin rose stiffly, her lawyers already moving toward the exit. But 2 county officers were waiting at the door. They stopped her, read her rights, walked her out in handcuffs as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. I watched without triumph, without satisfaction, just quiet recognition that justice isn't revenge. It's restoration. It's setting things right. It's making sure the truth has weight equal to its importance. Outside, people wanted to talk, to shake my hand, to thank me for fighting when they couldn't. The elderly woman from the cottage hugged me, tears shining in her eyes. "You stood up," she said. "When the rest of us couldn't, you stood up." I drove home as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The cabin waited, solid and unchanged. I sat on the dock, boots hanging above the darkening water, and heard my grandfather's voice as clearly as if he were sitting beside me. "The lake remembers Wesley, and now it would remember this too." Not the fight, not the courthouse drama, but the truth that some things can't be taken. Some things stand because they were built right and defended well. The water was glass. The cabin was home. And I was exactly where I belonged. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Within a week of Judge Morrison's ruling, federal agents descended on the HOA office building. They arrived at dawn with search warrants and evidence boxes, spending 12 hours cataloging every document, every email, every financial record the organization had produced since its incorporation in 2018. Fletcher called me that evening with updates. They found additional evidence of fraud we didn't even know about: shell companies, falsified appraisals, kickback schemes with property developers. Wesley, this thing goes deeper than we thought. The arrests came in waves. First Corin, charged with 23 counts including mail fraud, document forgery, conspiracy to defraud, and racketeering. Then 2 board members who'd helped orchestrate the scheme. Then the lawyer who'd drafted the fraudulent documents. Each arrest was covered by local news, each one peeling back another layer of systematic corruption. The HOA dissolved within 2 weeks. The state revoked its charter. Assets were frozen pending restitution hearings. Property owners who'd paid fines or fees based on fraudulent violations were contacted about refunds. Families who'd been forced to sell were offered first right of refusal to buy back their properties at the prices they'd sold for, with interest. Marcus Henderson was one of the first to respond. "I never thought I'd see that cottage again," he told me over the phone, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought it was gone forever, but now my grandkids might actually get to fish off that dock like I did when I was young." Alina Wright moved back into her home 3 months later. Her children helped her, bringing boxes and furniture and memories back to the house her husband had built. She invited me for coffee on her first day back, and we sat on her porch overlooking the water, not saying much, just being present in the quiet restoration of something stolen. The Torres family bought back their property and started hosting family gatherings there again. "We're not renting it out," Jennifer said when I saw them at the lake one weekend. "We're keeping it in the family where it belongs, where it always belonged." But not every story had a happy ending. 2 of the 8 families had moved too far away to return. One property owner had passed away before seeing justice served. The damage Corin had done couldn't be completely undone, no matter how thorough the investigation or how severe the consequences. The trial began in late summer. Federal courthouse, jury of 12, prosecutors who'd spent months building an airtight case. I testified on the first day, walking through the timeline of harassment, the forged documents, the midnight trespass, the systematic pressure designed to break my will. Corin's defense was predictable. She claimed she'd acted in good faith, that any irregularities were the result of administrative errors by subordinates, that she'd never personally directed anyone to falsify documents. But Lillian's testimony destroyed that defense. She produced emails with Corin's explicit instructions, time-stamped directives, a paper trail that couldn't be explained away. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all counts: guilty. Judge Morrison sentenced her 3 weeks later, 8 years in federal prison, full restitution to all affected property owners, permanent ban from serving on any homeowners association board or property management company. As he read the sentence, his voice was measured but firm. "You weaponized bureaucracy," he said. "You took the legitimate framework of community governance and perverted it into an instrument of theft. You targeted vulnerable people, exploited their trust in official processes, and destroyed lives for personal gain. This sentence reflects not just the crimes you committed, but the systematic betrayal of trust they represent." Corin showed no emotion when the bailiffs led her away. Just the same rigid composure she'd maintained throughout, as if admitting feeling would be admitting guilt. Afterward, Fletcher and I stood outside the courthouse. Reporters wanted statements. Cameras wanted reactions, but I had nothing dramatic to say, just the truth, simple and clear. "Justice took time," I told them, "but it came, and now 8 families have a chance to reclaim what was stolen from them. That's what matters." That evening, I drove back to the lake. The cabin stood exactly as it had for 78 years, weathered but solid, unchanged by the chaos that had swirled around it. I walked down to the dock and sat in my grandfather's spot, watching sunset paint the water in shades of copper and gold. A car pulled up the access road. Fletcher. He'd driven out without calling, carrying a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. We sat together on the dock, not talking much, just watching the light fade and the stars emerge. "You could have settled," he said finally. "Multiple times. They offered you money, offered to make it go away quietly. Why didn't you?" I thought about that. About my grandfather's letter and the cabin he'd built with his own hands. About Alina crying when she lost her home and Marcus never expecting to see his cottage again. About the principle that some things are worth more than convenience or comfort. "Because settling would have meant they were right," I said. "That property is just property, that home is just an address, that heritage can be erased with enough paperwork and pressure. And that's not true. Some things matter more than the path of least resistance. Some things are worth defending all the way to the end." Fletcher nodded. "You know there are already 3 other HOA fraud cases being investigated in neighboring counties. Your case opened doors, made people realize they could fight back, that they didn't have to accept abuse wrapped in official language." "Good," I said. "Then maybe something good came from all this." We finished the whiskey as night settled fully over the water. Stars reflected on the surface, bright points of light in darkness. The cabin stood solid behind us, every timber exactly where my grandfather had placed it 78 years ago. Before Fletcher left, he turned back. "What are you going to do now?" I looked at the cabin, at the lake, at the land my family had protected through 3 generations. "Same thing I've always done. Maintain what matters, preserve what has value. Live here on land my grandfather built the way he intended." "That's it?" he asked. "That's everything," I said. After he drove away, I sat on the porch alone, listening to the night sounds. Water lapping against the dock, wind through the pines, the creak of old wood settling. My grandfather had been right. The lake held memories better than concrete or steel or any document filed in a county office. And now it would remember this too, not as triumph or victory, but as preservation, as the simple act of protecting what matters, of standing firm when pressure mounted, of believing that truth has weight when given voice. The stars wheeled overhead. The water darkened to black, and I sat in the place I belonged, in the home my grandfather built, on land my family earned, exactly where I'd always meant to be. 6 months after the trial ended, I stood on the dock at dawn with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand. The mist clung to the water like memory refusing to fade, and the light moved slowly across the surface, turning everything gold and amber just as it had every morning for 78 years. The cabin looked different now, though nothing about its structure had changed. The weathered cedar was still darkened with age. The carved sign above the door still read Brant, 1947. Every timber and beam sat exactly where my grandfather had placed it, but something had shifted in the way people saw it. Cars slowed when they passed the access road now, not to gawk or judge, but to look with something like respect. The cabin had become more than just a building. It had become a symbol, proof that history could stand against pressure, that heritage had value beyond market price, that one person refusing to back down could make a difference. I'd gotten letters, dozens of them, from property owners fighting their own HOA battles, from preservation societies wanting to document the cabin's history, from law students asking to interview me about standing up to institutional fraud. I answered what I could, always with the same message: document everything. Stand firm. Trust that truth has weight. Alina Wright visited twice a month now, bringing coffee and stories about settling back into her home. Marcus Henderson stopped by occasionally with his grandkids, teaching them to fish off the same dock where he'd learned as a boy. The Torres family invited me to a barbecue at their reclaimed property, and we spent an evening sharing lake stories and watching their children play in the same water where generations before them had played. The HOA building sat empty now, windows dark, parking lot cracked and overgrown with weeds. The sign had been taken down, leaving only mounting holes and weathered paint where the letters had been. Some properties that had been absorbed into common areas were being returned to their original owners or sold to families who would actually live in them rather than corporations that saw them as investments. The lake was changing back into what it had been before Corin's vision tried to reshape it. Not a curated development with uniform aesthetics and strict regulations, but a community of different people with different homes, all sharing water and land and history. Fletcher stopped by one afternoon in late autumn, briefcase in hand, but no urgent business to discuss. We sat on the porch drinking coffee while leaves drifted down from the maples my grandfather had planted in 1953. "The last restitution check went out yesterday," he said. "Every family that paid fraudulent fines has been refunded with interest. Every forced sale has been addressed. The federal investigation is officially closed." "How much did she steal in total?" I asked. "Just over $2 million across all the schemes. Property acquisitions, fraudulent fines, kickbacks from developers. She was building an empire on other people's land and calling it community improvement." We sat in silence for a while, watching the water. Then Fletcher said something that surprised me. "You know what the most common question I get asked about this case is? People always want to know if you were scared, if you ever thought about giving up." "What do you tell them?" "I tell them the truth, that you were absolutely scared, that there were nights you probably lay awake wondering if fighting was worth it, but that being scared and being brave aren't opposites. That courage is doing the right thing even when you're terrified of the cost." I thought about those nights, the weight of the shotgun in my hands, the video that made me look dangerous, the mounting legal bills and the knowledge that I was fighting an organization with far more resources than I had. Yes, I'd been scared, but I'd also been certain. "My grandfather built this cabin when he came back from war," I said. "He could have built anywhere, could have chosen easier land, could have settled for something that required less work. But he chose this spot because it meant something to him, because the lake gave him peace after years of chaos. And he built something that would last not just for himself, but for the generations that came after him." I looked at Fletcher. How could I give that up? How could I let someone take what he built, what he preserved, what he intended to pass down? Some things are worth fighting for regardless of the cost. This was one of them. Fletcher nodded. "For what it's worth, I think he'd be proud of what you did." "I know he would," I said, "because I did exactly what he told me to do in that letter. I didn't let them rewrite what we built." After Fletcher left, I walked down to the waterline. The lake was calm, surface like glass, reflecting clouds and sky with perfect clarity. A loon called out in the distance, its cry echoing across the water. The same sound my grandfather had heard, the same sound his father before him had heard, the same sound that would echo here long after I was gone. That's what heritage means. Not just preserving buildings or maintaining property lines, but protecting the continuity of experience, the chain of memory that connects past to present to future. When Corin tried to take my land, she wasn't just stealing property. She was trying to erase a story, to break a chain that had held for 3 generations. But the chain hadn't broken, it had held. I thought about all the families who hadn't been as lucky. The ones who'd been pushed out before the truth came to light, who'd lost their battles to organizations that had better lawyers and deeper pockets. The ones who'd settled because they couldn't afford to keep fighting, who'd walked away from heritage because the cost of defending it was too high. The system had worked in my case, but that didn't mean it always worked. Justice had prevailed, but only because I'd had the resources to fight and the evidence to prove my case and the stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Not everyone had those advantages. That thought stayed with me as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The lake turned from blue to copper to deep purple, the colors shifting like something alive. My grandfather used to say the lake had moods, but it was always the same water. The moods just revealed it differently. I went inside as darkness settled over the water. The cabin felt solid around me, every board and beam exactly where it should be. I made dinner, ate on the porch, watched stars emerge one by one above the tree line. The same stars my grandfather had watched. The same sky. The same eternal rhythm of day and night, season and season, generation and generation. Before bed, I opened the safe one last time. The original deed from 1947 lay on top, the paper yellowed but the ink still clear. My grandfather's signature was firm and steady, written by a man who'd survived war and built something that would outlast him. Beneath it was the letter he'd written in 1985. I read it again, though I knew every word by heart. If someone tries to take this land, remember that our rights don't come from paperwork. They come from history, from sweat, from being here first. Don't let them rewrite what we built. I'd kept that promise, protected what he'd built, defended what he'd preserved. And now I could pass it forward knowing the chain remained unbroken, the story continued, the heritage endured. I locked the safe and turned off the lights. Through the window, the lake was a sheet of black glass, reflecting nothing but stars. Somewhere in that darkness, I could feel my grandfather's presence, not as a ghost or a memory, but as something woven into the land itself, inseparable from the water and the wood and the quiet strength of things built to last. The lake remembers everything, he used to tell me, and now it would remember this too, not as a battle or a victory, but as preservation. As the simple, necessary act of standing firm when everything else wanted to move, of protecting what matters, of believing that some things are worth fighting for all the way to the end. I climbed into bed, into the room where my grandfather had slept and my father had slept, and now I slept, carrying forward the legacy they'd entrusted to me. Outside, the water lapped against the dock. The wind moved through the pines, and the cabin stood solid in the darkness, exactly where it had stood for 78 years, exactly where it would stand for generations to come. Because some things, when they're built right and defended well, don't just survive. They endure. They persist. They become part of the landscape itself, woven so deeply into the land and water and memory that no amount of paperwork or pressure can erase them. The lake was here before the surveyors came. It'll be here long after the lawyers pack up their briefcases and drive back to their climate-controlled offices. And so will this cabin, standing on land my grandfather built with his own hands, protected by truth and defended by stubbornness, and preserved by the simple refusal to let history be rewritten by people who never earned the right. I closed my eyes and let sleep come, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow morning I'd wake up in the same place I belonged, on my land, in my home, exactly where my grandfather intended me to be. The lake remembers, and now it always will.